Howard, what would your response be to a dealership who said it's really difficult to attract and recruit great people in the automotive industry?
Yeah, there's no doubt that it's difficult to attract talent and people into a variety of industries. The automotive, perhaps more challenging than some, but I think if we can try and challenge some of those institutionalised norms, such as full-time roles, length of hours, we can actually open ourselves up to a different pool of talent. And that talent might look very different. It might be in terms of flexibility, in terms of hours. It could take into account job share roles. But all of a sudden, the automotive industry is quite an attractive industry to be. And if you think about it from a technology perspective, the automotive industry is pretty much at its very best.
What would your response be to someone from a dealership who said, it seems near impossible to reduce employee turnover?
Yeah, definitely a massive challenge for many businesses, dealerships, particularly in the past. But I think what we've got to try and do is focus on the reasons why staff turnover has been high in the past. And generally in the automotive industry and in our own dealership, it's been as a consequence of perhaps poor recruitment, so poor selection. It could be as a consequence of poor onboarding, poor training, lack of clarity. So there's a whole lot of things that could influence high staff turnover. I think as a business, if we can start to focus on the recruitment process, onboarding, training, then we can start to get the right talent into the dealership, and then by virtue of that, staff turnover should start to reduce. Yeah, so I spoke about the high cost of staff turnover and perhaps focusing on some of the consequences of that staff turnover opposed to that actual result. And one of those areas was definitely in terms of recruitment. So from a recruitment perspective, we looked at trying to utilise two tools. One, to have a gender neutral environment in terms of the way that we actually advertise the role. And secondly, trying to remove our bias. And there was a great story of an audition for an orchestra that took place behind a curtain, and that really resonated with us. So we tried to apply that same style of theory. On top of that, we then looked at widening the pool of talent away from some of those full-time roles to provide flexible hours, job sharing, again, that I've spoken about as well. So there's not one solution, but there are a number that we can try and utilise.
What would your response be to someone from a dealership who said, retaining top employees is a real challenge in this industry?
Yeah, I can definitely understand the statement, because we work so hard at trying to attract the talent and then obviously trying to employ the talent. And then once we've ticked those boxes, we've then got this responsibility of trying to retain that talent. And I think that's where the culture of the organisation really gets brought to life. And there's a lot of UGRs, those unwritten ground rules that come into play. For our organisation, we exist to make our guests happy and our workplace fun. And what I mean by that is, by guests happy, that at the end of every single Toyota ad, there's this "oh, what a feeling" slogan that comes out, and we just want to get that brought to life in every single experience. By our workplace being fun, I mean I enjoy coming to work because it's a good place to be. I have a great relationship with my manager. There's clarity in terms of the expectations of my role. I enjoy the people I work with. I'm listened to, I'm engaged, and I'm enabled to do my job. So they're just some of the things that we think that can really add to the culture of any organisation that's going to assist in the retention of talent.
What would your response be to someone from a dealership who said, I'd employ more women if I could, most just aren't interested in working in a dealership?
Yeah, I could certainly understand the question and the statement, because if I go back a number of years, and probably for myself as well, I probably said and heard that statement from many managers. What I can tell you is this, probably 3 years ago, our gender balance was approaching 19%, okay? This month, we've just celebrated 38%. And that 38% just isn't in the total gender balance, it's also within our management team as well. So we know that we can achieve that. So then it talks about the how, okay? So the first things we've spoken about, things like tools. What are the tools that we can use to try and attract women into our industry? That's number one. Secondly, what sort of environment are they going to come into? What's the language? What does it feel like? Okay? And thirdly, I think it's largely about making yourself a destination. Because I think if women feel comfortable in the business, they become their own net promoters of the business and of that place where it's a good place to be. So I understand the statement, but we know that's not the case.
What would your response be to someone from a dealership who said, women have a hard time fitting into our business?
Yeah, it's an interesting statement because I think for so many years, the automotive industry, particularly within dealerships, has had a huge amount of masculinity to it, both in terms of the roles, in terms of management, in terms of leadership. So I think it's about the business adjusting to attract women and then making itself a destination and the environment where women can actually thrive and prosper and succeed.
What would your response be to someone from a dealership who said, "We're a customer-focused operation, flexibility doesn't work for us"?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I can tell you back 12 months ago, or perhaps 18 months ago, we ran an engagement and enablement survey, okay, for all of our people. And within the vehicle sales environment, we got a lot of feedback about how disengaging it was in terms of the volume of hours that our salespeople, some of our sales managers, and all those people that are associated with vehicle sales and within the service advisor environment had to work. And it was actually decreasing their engagement. So what we ended up doing was perhaps providing some flexible working hours, some different working arrangements. And by doing that, we increased engagement. By increasing engagement, we then increase guest satisfaction. And our net promoter business, our guest satisfaction index score has increased.
What would your response be to someone from a dealership who said, "Why is it important to employ women in automotive"?
It's hugely important, and I understand that's quite a contention in today's world. So I understand that. But if you're looking for a compelling reason as to why we should employ women in the automotive industry, first of all, we know in the world and in many businesses that those businesses that have good gender balance, good diversity, are more profitable than those that don't. So there's one compelling business reason. Secondly, when we look at our own dealership, we know that 50% of all of our sales are to women. And we know that women are responsible for making, or 80% of women are responsible for making the decisions that influence a vehicle purchase. When I look at our own numbers once again, I know in the 2017-18 year, when we increased our gender balance from 19% up, I think then to the mid-30s, our profitability increased by 17% and our vehicle sales increased by 34%. So there's just a few reasons why. I also think it's about the feeling in an organisation. It's about trying to replicate your audience, your guests, and it's a feel-good factor in the actual dealership.